Here's what happens every time you take your car to a mechanic. They start saying words: timing chain, valve cover gasket, crankshaft position sensor. You nod, slowly, like someone who has absolutely no intention of admitting they have no idea what any of that means. Then you go home with the quote. You sit with it, and something uncomfortable arrives. You paid $30, $40, $50,000 for something you cannot explain, something running directly beneath you every single day. Something that, if it decides to stop running, you have no framework to understand why. That ends today. Every major part inside a car engine, 6 systems, what each part does, what it costs you when it fails, and which failures mean a bad week, and which ones mean a new engine. 6 systems: rotating assembly, timing, valvetrain, lubrication, cooling, air, fuel, and exhaust. We're covering all of them. Let's go. System 1, rotating assembly. This is the foundation, the bottom end, the mechanical core of the entire engine. The engine block, iron or aluminum casting, houses the cylinders, the bored holes where combustion actually happens. Everything else attaches to this. A cracked block doesn't get repaired. It gets replaced. Pistons, they sit inside the cylinders. Fuel and air ignite above them. The explosion pushes the piston down. That downward force becomes mechanical energy. That energy becomes everything else. Piston rings. 3 rings on every piston. 2 compression rings that seal combustion pressure above the piston where it belongs. 1 oil control ring that keeps oil off the cylinder wall so it doesn't get burned with the fuel. When rings wear out, the engine burns oil. When they fail, the engine burns through itself. Connecting rods. They connect the pistons to the crankshaft. They convert the up and down motion of the piston into the rotation the crankshaft needs. Thousands of times per minute, under extreme heat and pressure. Every second the engine is running. When a rod bearing spins from oil starvation, a connecting rod can exit through the side of the engine block. Not metaphorically, through the wall. That's called throwing a rod. That's why mechanics go quiet when someone says those words. Crankshaft, the part that actually rotates. Every piston pushes a rod, every rod pushes the crank, and the crankshaft converts it all into rotation. That rotation is what eventually reaches your wheels. So, main bearings. The crankshaft floats on a pressurized film of oil between itself and these bearings. Remove that film, even briefly, and metal contacts metal. At several thousand RPM. That is not a recoverable event. System 2, timing. The rotating assembly moves at high speed. The valvetrain needs to stay in perfect sync with it. The timing system is what enforces that relationship. Timing chain, or timing belt, connects the crankshaft to the camshaft. Keeps them synchronized so that valves open and close at exactly the right moment, relative to exactly where the piston is. 1 tooth, that's the entire margin of error. 1 tooth off and the valves and pistons try to occupy the same physical space at the same time. Your engine is an interference engine. That means if timing slips, if the chain stretches, if the belt snaps, physics does not negotiate. The engine destroys itself. In one event, timing chain tensioner keeps the chain taut. When a tensioner has a faulty check valve, it bleeds down overnight. Cold start, you hear a rattle. 2 seconds, then silence. Most owners normalize it, just how it sounds in the morning. They drive it for months. Then one day it doesn't rattle, it skips, and then they understand exactly what that rattle was trying to tell them. Timing gears / sprockets. 1 on the crankshaft, 1 on the camshaft. The chain wraps around both. Not glamorous. Completely non-negotiable. System 3, valvetrain. If the rotating assembly is the engine's muscle, the valvetrain is its lungs. Camshaft. A shaft with precisely machined lobes. As it rotates, each lobe pushes a valve open at exactly the right moment. Intake stroke, air and fuel come in. Exhaust stroke, burned gases go out. The shape of those lobes determines how the engine breathes. An aggressive camshaft makes more power at high RPM and a rough, choppy idle. That low burble on a modified car? That's the camshaft's lobes doing what the factory never intended. Valves. Intake valves let the air-fuel mixture in. Exhaust valves let burned gases out. They open and close thousands of times per minute. At temperatures most metals would deform under. Carbon buildup on intake valves is a known failure mode on direct injection engines. The fuel spray that used to wash the back of the valve, it no longer reaches it. Carbon accumulates, power drops, idle roughens. The service is called walnut blasting. Yes, actual walnut shells. No, you can't skip it forever. Valve springs and seals. Springs close the valves after the cam lobe releases them. Seals keep oil out of the combustion chamber. When valve seals wear, you get blue smoke on cold startup and an engine that slowly consumes oil with no visible external leak. Visible to you, anyway. Hydraulic lifters. Sit between the camshaft and valves. Transmit the opening motion. When they starve for oil or begin to fail, you get a tick. Persistent. Rhythmic. Linked directly to engine RPM. That is a noise you do not ignore. System 4, lubrication. Every surface inside the engine that moves against another surface needs oil between it. Every single one. Without the lubrication system, your engine destroys itself in minutes. Not hours. Minutes. Oil pan. Where oil lives when the engine isn't running. At the bottom, contains the drain plug for oil changes. If someone over-tightens it, strips the threads, and doesn't mention it, the conversation that follows costs more than the oil change you were trying to save money on. Oil pump, driven by the crankshaft. The moment the engine starts, the oil pump begins moving oil from the pan through every gallery in the block and head. On cold start, oil hasn't fully reached everything yet. That's why you don't hammer a cold engine. The oil is still on its way. Oil galleries, internal passages drilled through the block and head. Completely invisible from the outside, they route oil to every bearing, every cam lobe, every timing component that depends on it. Engine sludge, caused by extended oil change intervals or wrong oil, blocks galleries. Bearings starve. The damage accumulates silently. It announces itself all at once. Oil filter, removes metal particles and combustion byproducts before the oil recirculates. A cheap filter that collapses its bypass valve doesn't filter. It just circulates contaminated oil through everything the clean oil was supposed to protect. Change your oil. Use the right filter. System 5, cooling. Combustion generates temperatures that would melt aluminum if nothing managed them. The cooling system keeps the engine at exactly the temperature it needs to be. Not higher, not lower either. Water pump. Circulates coolant through the engine and the radiator. On many modern engines, it's electric, with a plastic impeller inside the housing. When that impeller cracks off the shaft, and it does, the housing looks fine from the outside. The shaft still spins, nothing leaks, your temperature gauge might not even move immediately. The coolant just stops moving. The engine keeps running, the heat builds, and by the time the gauge reacts, the damage is already in progress. Thermostat. Controls when coolant flows to the radiator. Cold engine, thermostat stays closed. The engine warms up faster. Hot engine, thermostat opens. Coolant goes out to the radiator to cool down. Stuck open, engine never reaches operating temperature. Fuel economy suffers. Emissions increase. Stuck closed, engine overheats. One of those is an inconvenience. The other is a countdown. Head gasket. Seals the combustion chamber from the coolant passages, keeps oil, coolant, and combustion gases separated from each other. When it fails, those things stop being separated. Milky oil on the dipstick. White smoke from the exhaust. A cooling system that keeps losing fluid with no visible external leak. An overheated engine that kept running is an engine that warped the head. A warped head means a head gasket job. A head gasket job on most modern engines is not a weekend project. System 6, air, fuel, and exhaust. Everything that feeds the engine and everything that leaves it, with the electronics that tie it all together. Throttle body. Controls how much air enters the engine based on your accelerator input. Carbon buildup causes rough idle and throttle hesitation. Usually a $20 cleaning, until someone tells you it needs replacing. Get a second opinion. Intake manifold. Distributes air to each cylinder. Houses vacuum ports for the brake booster, the PCV system, and various sensors. When intake manifold gaskets fail, especially on older GM engines, vacuum leaks cause rough idle, poor fuel economy, and check engine codes that point in every direction except the actual problem. Fuel injectors, precisely timed pulses of fuel, synchronized to the combustion cycle. Clogged injectors cause misfires and rough running. Leaking injectors put raw fuel directly in the cylinder. Raw fuel in the cylinder washes oil off the cylinder walls. You already know what happens to metal surfaces without oil. Ignition coils. Generate the high voltage that fires the spark plugs. One coil per cylinder on most modern engines. When one fails, that cylinder misfires. You feel it as a vibration. Leave it long enough and unburned fuel passes through the exhaust and destroys the catalytic converter. The $30 coil becomes a $1,200 repair. Crankshaft position sensor. Tells the ECU where the crankshaft is in its rotation, thousands of readings per second. When it fails, and it can fail suddenly, without any warning, the ECU sees no engine. No engine means no fuel, no spark. The car stops, while driving, at speed. ECU, engine control unit. Processes every sensor input, controls ignition timing, injection timing, variable valve timing, fuel trims. Every system in this video sends data to the ECU. Every output comes from it. It's not the part that fails most often. It's the part that makes all the other parts make sense. Exhaust manifold, catalytic converter, O2 sensors. Exhaust gases leave the cylinders, collect in the manifold, pass through the catalytic converter, where a chemical reaction converts combustion byproducts into less harmful outputs, then past oxygen sensors that send fuel trim data back to the ECU in real time. The catalytic converter is also the most stolen part on your car, depending on where you park. That is not a joke. It stopped being a joke years ago. Here's what all 6 systems have in common. None of them fail in isolation. The crankshaft depends on the lubrication system. The timing chain depends on oil pressure. The head gasket depends on the cooling system. The catalytic converter depends on the ignition coils. Everything is downstream of something else. Your engine doesn't have individual failure points, it has cascades. One system gets neglected, and the failure doesn't stay where it started. It finds the next weakest thing, and then the next. That's what makes an engine both impressive and unforgiving. Hundreds of parts, thousands of combustion events per minute, temperatures that need a completely separate cooling system to survive, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. And it works, for hundreds of thousands of miles, when you treat it like what it actually is. The owners getting 300,000 miles without drama aren't lucky. They just know what's in there. Now you do too. Drop a comment. Which part of your engine are you most afraid to think about right now? We read every single one. Subscribe. Peace out.